And when you and I were in the other body, I found that one of the two visitors' galleries was named the Peratrovich Gallery. And I only knew about Elizabeth Peratrovich briefly. Of course, she played a key role in passing the first anti-discrimination law in the United States here in Alaska. The other chamber on the other side is named for a former representative, and two chambers behind us here are named for former senators. So I assume that she had simply been a member of the other body, not elected. In fact, the Peratrovich Gallery is the only gallery in this capital named for someone other than a former legislator. Tomorrow, Mr. President, is Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. February 16th is the day the Anti-Discrimination Act was signed by Governor Steve Cooper, and it was passed by the legislature on February 6, 1988. The legislation honored Mrs. Peratrovich, and our statutes, read very briefly if I can, Mr. President, say it was for her courageous, unceasing efforts to eliminate discrimination and bring about equal rights in Alaska. She was born in 1911 in Petersburg. She died December 1st here in Juneau at the surprisingly young age of 47. She's buried here in Juneau alongside her husband, Roy. She was a Tlingit, married to Roy Peratrovich with 3 children. They lived in Klawock, where Roy was the mayor for 4 terms, then moved to Juneau, then into Canada for college, and finally back to Alaska. Her husband, Roy, was a delegate with your father to the Alaska Constitutional Convention and served actually 18 years in both the Territorial House, the Territorial Senate, and of course the Alaska State House and the Alaska State Senate from 1945 to 1972, off and on with a few years out. But, Mr. President, the discrimination that the Peratoviches experienced while living here in Alaska in 1941 is truly shocking by today's standards. She wrote that they had difficulty finding housing, that there were signs banning Native entry to public buildings. She petitioned the governor, Ernest Greening, asking him to ban the No Natives Allowed signs that were here all over Alaska. The first Anti-Discrimination Act was defeated by our territorial legislature in 1943, but she never gave up and worked hard to end racial discrimination here in Alaska among 4 Alaska Natives. And of course, many Natives faced unemployment and poverty because of segregation and discrimination because of their race. The Peratoviches continued to lobby the territorial legislature. She testified before the Senate in 1945. There were only 8 senators at that time, much smaller group. And one of the territorial senators made a comment that I really think we need to hear, if you wouldn't mind my reading it, Mr. President.
Without objection.
He said, a state senator said, "Who are these people, barely out of savagery, who want to associate with us whites, with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us?" The custom in the Senate, Mr. President, at the time was in the small gallery where the Speaker's office is. The custom at that time, in 1945, was to allow anyone to speak, and it was open, and many people spoke on this issue, and she was the final speaker. And, Mr. President, her testimony is passionate and really very moving. She said, again, if I could quote,
You may.
"I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded history and civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights." The Senate passed the resolution. It gave full and equal accommodation facilities, privileges to all citizens of Alaska, of the territory, and there were also penalties for violation. The bill was signed by Ernest Greening, Governor Greening, and that would be actually 20 years, if you can imagine it, before Congress passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. A courageous woman could not remain silent in the face of injustice and prejudice and discrimination. I just hope we'll all take a moment tomorrow to remember why we in Alaska established February 16th as Elizabeth Peratrovich Day.
Thank you. Well said, Senator.